Hey everyone, how you doing? Yeah, enjoy the pizza, the beer and stuff. Cool. Hi, I'm Francisco Diaz, and I want to talk to you about cssUtils. It's a library that I made. But before that, I always think that it's pretty important if you're getting a talk from somebody that you know who they are and like why they should be in front of you. I'm a software developer at HubSpot, and I've been here for kind of a while. But before I got there, I graduated from Northeastern University. I got on the front page of these websites, but that's kind of cheating to say that because, is this mic working at all? Yes? No? Okay. But it's kind of cheating to say that because I worked for these. So I was kind of in by default. But something weird happened to me when I got to HubSpot. I realized that I was now working with a lot more people that were a lot more qualified than me. And in my previous job, I was designing games for kids. And they really didn't like it when someone just switched over from the line from a designer to a developer. So in practice, in a professional setting, I was really rusty with coding. So, oh, wow. Okay. So I really didn't believe that I was as good as I thought I should be. So I tried to get better. And I was nervous about it. But like, how do you get better? Well, I just told you. Don't tell anybody about it. But no, for real, I just started reading pull requests. I read a lot of pull requests. I read thousands of pull requests. And after a little bit of time, I got enough confidence and felt like I could talk to people about their projects. So I started asking questions. I asked a lot of questions. And then after some more time, I started making suggestions. So I started having conversations about people's work. And I learned a lot. I learned like really three main things. And one of them was how to provide a good code review. Also, how to not provide a good code review. That I had imposter syndrome. Like looking back at it now, there's a bunch of cool things that I've done. And I thought about like how someone might deal with that. And the majority of what like his talk is here and what we sold you on is about CSS issues in terms of scaling and consistency. But I'm going to talk about those first two things really quickly because I think they're important. So when you're doing a code review and you're looking at somebody's PR, the first thing that you have to really consider is you're talking about someone's ideas. So you're talking to a person first and the things that they thought of. And you really got to separate what you think of that or how you think things should be from the way that you talk to somebody. Like you've got to treat them as a person. So the state of that person's code versus how that person feels could be something very, very different. Like they could have tried really hard and come up with a solution that like you don't agree with. Talk to them about where they were coming from. Give a measured response. There was one time when someone ended up using a paragraph tag with a non-breaking space. And I said, don't do that. And they were like, maybe I should. And then I wrote a 2,000-word essay on why that was wrong. Well sourced, by the way. 3 code pens, no less. But like, that was really a huge waste of effort because like, you're not actually helping anyone. Like, okay, maybe you like feel right when you're doing it and you're like, I'm definitely justified in this. But that is the worst medium to like bury a possible discussion or like a bunch of thoughts in like a comment on a pull request that I think ended up being closed anyways. So like figure it out and like you're talking to a person. It's also hard to convey emotions over text. So use emojis and GIFs. Like just say hi, like stuff. Like give something to indicate like supportiveness in your mood. yeah, so I was saying some things that are like pretty bad about a code review. And yeah, definitely 2,000 words is too long of a comment. Yeah. So imposter syndrome and dealing with it. One thing that helped me a lot is if you try to frame your accomplishments as if somebody else did them and you met that person, would you be impressed by them? Would you be like, wow, like that was cool? If you're like really trying to deal with it, like pick one thing to get better at and then like keep working towards that. And then try to like, at least at the beginning, like figure out if there's a goal there and see if you're like moving closer to it. And talk to people and see if like they're interested in what you're doing. But yeah, having like a healthy output for that stuff is pretty important, I think. So I said I was reading a lot of pull requests, and I saw a lot of issues with CSS. So the issues are like really boiled down to having two sides, I think. When I asked people about like what they were doing, it was kind of rough because people were coming back with inconsistent answers and they were providing inconsistent solutions to it. So with CSS, there's literally there's over 20 different ways to like change a background color, and like we were doing all of them. So, but between seeing that we were doing all of them and then asking why we were doing any particular one of them, the answers just were all across the board. So like that was a pretty rough spot. And the other side of that was me reviewing things. I set out to go and learn about other people's code and get better, and I suddenly became kind of repetitive, almost giving the same advice over and over. And like, if you're a programmer, you probably want to figure out a way to automate that. But I felt really bad about taking people's original ideas and then just kind of being like, yeah, processed it over, like flip it over, we're done. And it was really going through the solutions that like I kind of came up with that were like available and like are kind of obvious is just kind of like use a linter or use a continuous integration bot to like say, hey, these are things that you shouldn't do. But those things aren't context aware of what you're building. And I think it's a little bit too late in the process to say like, hey, I built this thing and this bot just told me I'm wrong. Like, but I did it already. I'm like done, and now I have to go back and like do it over. Because someone somewhere decided that like those were a set of rules that we're going to adhere to, and we don't really know about it. And then as an organization, you got to figure out what your core competency is, where your core focus is. And for us, we're not building new apps for like different clients all the time. We're working on our same apps. So not everyone needs to have being an expert at CSS as a core competency, because we need to be consistent. So we should be probably leveraging a lot of the same tools. So all of those things of like linting, continuous integration, commenting on PRs, they're really reactive solutions. So they're just treating symptoms. They're going and just dealing with things that are happening. So the actual problem kind of like boiled down to two things, I think. Education about visual systems and CSS. So really quickly, the thing that I noticed I thought people could benefit from knowing the most was that in a visual system that there's really kind of a separation of layout and style. So layout is how pieces of content are arranged. It's not really visually opinionated, and it can be deterministic of hierarchy. So like the first thing that you look at on the page, or basically if you're looking at like 4 columns or 3 columns of text, it's the same text and like content that's there, but it's just presented slightly differently. But you don't have an emotional response to having 4 columns or 3 columns. I mean, like if you do, I guess we could talk later about that, but it's just weird to me that like if you're just going with that. So layout like typically doesn't change too much. We're using a lot of this very similar systems as we're in books, and then kind of translated those systems to the web, and they're holding out pretty decently. I mean, like, grid is now part of the spec for CSS, and that's based on grid layouts that came from books. So we have style as the other piece. It's visually opinionated. It's stuff like colors, font face, backgrounds. It kind of inspires feelings like vintage, futuristic, your favorite Instagram filter, or whatever that is. And it's usually associated with theming. So like examples of style would be literally just changing text out. If this is really where you want to go. This is the rest of the presentation style, by the way. Right there, where, God no. So it's actually kind of cool because there's some pretty interesting pieces of CSS that kind of goes in on those lines. So there's very much some rules that you can associate with layout and style where they're not exactly layout and style, but it's more like visual and non-visual things. So we have things like display and like text align, which are more associated with layout than they are with style. And then you have some stuff that kind of like blurs the borders between those, like border, because you are associating the pixel value, which can push things over, but you're also doing things like dash and specifying the color, which those have nothing to do with layout. I mean, like, you could get like really crazy and make a triangle with that too, so it's just weird. And then like color, font face, those things, for the majority of it, aren't gonna change things out on you. So when I was going through the CSS issues, or CSS is made up of really two parts, and there's selectors and rules. And when I was going through it, I realized that the only issues with CSS were selectors and rules. So that's all of it. Yeah, it's 100% coverage on that one. So I'm gonna go through like some of the problems that I saw with selectors. Is that well, selectors qualify markup so that you can just kind of say like these are the things that are affected, and then rules will be applied to that so that they change. Scope is hard. Specificity is tough to understand. You can confidently add something new to it, but it's hard to take it back. And the tools to figure out specificity aren't great. So, excuse me. So scope. Estimating the scope of your selectors can be like really tricky because it's hard to figure out like what you're selecting, because you can say I want to select like a list or a class, and if you're working on your feature and you use that class, but maybe there's someone that's working on some other part of the website. Maybe it was you a year ago. Maybe it's you a year in the future, and you have no idea if that selector is eventually going to change that thing that someone else is working on. Or if you try to change an existing selector, like you might break somebody else's thing. So it's really hard to figure that out. Yeah. And when you're making those selectors, you can start by saying I want something that's like pretty general, but as soon as you add something else that's more specific on top of it, you can't take that more general thing out, because rules already apply to both things. And if something else is using that for how it depends on rendering, then you're going to break that thing. It's also really tricky to figure out what selector is actually going to come out on top. Like, if you look at both of these selectors, I mean, one is way more intense than the other. Like, someone is really battling to get that in. And you know what? It's still not going to overwrite it because the specificity is lower. Because an ID will always beat any number of classes or element selectors. But that's not like one of the first things that you teach. Like, you don't figure out, you're like, okay, like the top thing gets read first and then it goes to the bottom. But Like, what if there's like an in-between there? Like, or how does that work? That gets like skipped over pretty hard. So if you are going through and then adding things with more specificity and then adding more selectors, like I said, you can't go back. Like, you can add a new thing. It's a lot easier to say like, okay, in my new little world, things are good. But I know that if I try to like leave that or change something out, I could ruin like everyone else's little world. So you just keep adding things to the product, and literally from the Wikipedia page on technical debt is how we're working with selectors. It's saying that we're just adding more and more code, and we're not dealing with the other problems that it could be making. And those problems are going to cost you a lot more when you try to make a change or go fix them. So I think that's a pretty serious thing. And tooling. I think one of the biggest reasons why tooling for CSS is lagging behind other languages on the web is people who write CSS have to use a different tool to make their tools better. So if you want to make a tool for CSS, you have to write it in like JavaScript or Ruby or literally anything else. But just being good at CSS doesn't allow you to make your CSS better like forever. Like, you can't make tooling for it. So that's a big hindrance, that if you want to do something to make CSS better, you have to get better at something completely unrelated to CSS-ish. So that's tough. And then even when you're just trying to figure out, well, like what the coverage of your selectors was, that ends up being really, really hard, because when you're trying to figure out code coverage for what's actually used, there's some selectors that are only used when your app is in a certain state. So for you to actually confidently be able to take a selector out, you have to be able to test your app on every page that a selector is included in every state of it. Because like, how else are you going to automate it unless you're like, oh, I already know where it exists. So if you're trying to like discover it, you're literally trying to check every state of your app everywhere, and that's completely impractical. So the other half of CSS was rules. I mean, every project starts young, and you got to do what you got to do to like make it work, right? So that's how everything on the web started. But the thing, especially with CSS, is once a rule exists, just like your selectors, it never goes away. And it never goes away because you don't want to break anything that existed before it. So, sorry, I already said that. So every rule just kind of starts existing, and it keeps propagating and just keeps existing. That's it. So we just keep getting more. And with other languages, you have a small set of tools that you can use to do a lot of things, like for loop, while, you can do math. CSS, you can do math, but it's like super weird. But generally, you have a lot of tools that do one thing versus a few tools that do a lot of things. So you literally need to have an encyclopedic amount of knowledge of how all these things work together before like you even start. And then if you're going to be like really serious about it, you need to have context of like the last couple of years of like what's been happening, or like what's going to happen, where like, can you invest a bunch of resources into like using Flexbox or Grid or something if your user base isn't a user base that uses that? So like, your decisions to build something have to be informed by a ton of research about how you already should have built something. Like, it's kind of crazy. Like, it's terrible to get started. And if you're looking for help, like, that's also terrible, because a lot of the most heavily referenced resources are some of the oldest ones, because like, that's what people write articles about. That's what people dealt with problems with. So when you're looking for a solution, you're going to get pointed to something that's out of date, and that's really hard to deal with. And it also propagates using the old stuff that like we have better things for. So it's just tough. It's like, how do we deal with that? Sorry. So outline the problems that HubSpot was having again. And in some ways, like all CSS, when you're adding to something a lot, you're making a very rigid system. It's easy to break. Eventually, you're going to be stuck in a spot where you're just putting out fires and then immediately going and like lighting one behind you and then putting that one out and then just going through again. It's like a dog with like a tree on its head, but like backwards and on fire. It's just, even that metaphor is terrible. Like, it's just bad. Like, don't start any of that. So it's hard to delete production CSS. And given that CSS oath, like as soon as something exists, it doesn't ever stop existing. Like, who's here still has prefixes on their stuff? Like, it's stuck. Like, none of the major browsers like use them anymore, but it's there. But you don't, like, if someone was learning CSS now, they wouldn't have to learn about like prefixing. But we still include it in a lot of things. So, so a solution that works for HubSpot, maybe you. Looking back, I thought it was something that should probably be proactive, low effort in terms of easy to adopt. You don't have to worry about scope, because if you don't have to worry about scope, then you can delete things, right? And it's gonna be like style guide independent. That was a requirement on us because when I started, we had 7 style guides, and I immediately made an 8th. So that was cool. Now things are much better. We have a component library, so we have 9, but we only use 1. Yeah, it's actually hard to find stuff from the first 7 now, so I'm sticking around. So I thought the best way we could be proactive about dealing with like someone having to learn something is make it so they don't have to learn that thing. Because I mean, why worry about like teaching them if we can just solve the problem, right? So I think that we can skip a lot of learning about scope with basically a lot of single-use classes that exist. Like if you're working on a product that's existed for a little while, or has a style guide, could be good or bad. I think that you can get pretty far with using a bunch of single-use classes, where it's basically, hold on. I did just remake all of the slides, so I'm trying to like find my spot again. So yeah, you can simplify scope by using a smaller set of classes that are applied directly to elements. So that way you don't really have to worry about the scope, and because you're not actually selecting a bunch of things, you're just making a predetermined decision on one thing. So that ends up helping with consistency, because if everyone's starting to use the same tooling, a lot of those decisions are just going to end up lining up, and you're going to start building things in similar ways, because it's the easiest way that you can go about building it. And I mean, it's nice to be lazy, so just take the easy path. And then if the easiest path is the one that leads to the most consistency and the highest product, then like I think you're winning. So here's an example of one of the utility classes where I was thinking that minimizing the amount of things that you need to learn is pretty high on that list of like the CSS that you don't need. So I figured if we're using single-use classes, we should probably just name it based on what it does. So if you need something that's like to be display flex, you could just add on display flex. And then with a curated set, it's kind of already pushing you in the right direction of like, here's the properties that you should be using. And then it already in context of like where you're building something, you can just kind of inspect it or like throw the class on there. If it does the change, then you got it. If it doesn't, you don't. Like, you don't have to go to can I use, you don't have to reference what your particular company's browser share is or like go through. Like, you just make that decision up front, and then as people are like trying to build things and use a convenient tool that they can just guess at the API, like, things I think go pretty well. CSS rules sometimes have to be in a certain context for them to work. So if you want to do like flex direction column on something, the parent needs to be flexbox, or well, the element needs to be flexbox, or the parent needs to be flexbox. So it's technically a flex child. So this just makes it flexbox. If you're using the other utility class, it overwrites it. So maybe you have to put 2 classes on there if you want an inline flex column. But I mean, you're going to do that anyways because it's weird. So I was saying that those one-purpose classes are like pretty useful, and it needs to be a curated set. But I didn't say like how the like curation line goes. Well, I was thinking about all of the stuff that's non-visual in terms of layout and style. So display, select, stuff like that. Sorry. So yeah, each class only has one purpose. You treat the class as immutable, so you never piggyback styles onto it, because if you're applying this class everywhere, you really want to know that like what you're putting on there is what you're exactly expecting to put on there. So if you are adding additional styles to something, maybe you want to just put those styles in that selector that you made anyways. Maybe you want it in like the special case, but don't put it on the utility class, because then you're going to kind of ruin that utility class for any time you want to use it in that context. So that's kind of useless. So when you're applying the class to an element or a component, you know the entire scope of its effects. So you can go through, and if you're going to delete that component or whatever, like you can just delete it, and you know you're not going to break anything else. So you can go back from this. Here's an example of some of the other utility classes that are on there, where like some ones that are like pretty useful are like flex strength 0 and flex row 1. Along with that, there's width 100, which just makes things 100%. So it's the kind of thing that it's just like nice to be able to tuck on there and keep moving. There's also another one that's pretty popular for margin and padding positioning, where we just basically move things in increments of 4 pixels. So that way we don't end up pixel pushing, and things end up just kind of lining up, because 4 goes into 100 evenly, and 12 is pretty divisible. So it's nice. The classes that I showed are basically like sorted into these files. So there's a bunch more of them. I just chose to show those. So you probably were looking at the examples before and noticed that I stuck important on them. And usually that's like a pretty bad thing, right? Or maybe, I mean, depending on how you're coding, but I don't know about you guys, but I put import on everything, and then nothing's ever terrible. I don't know how everyone else's life is. No, I'm just kidding. There's a thing that I think where I think about like 2 things about scope. And one of them is, I think that you should give the person who's most in context of a problem anything that they need to help them make that decision. And I think in terms of CSS, like I was saying before, is actually limiting some of those choices, but like still giving them all the room that they need to move forward, and give them the room that they need to move forward in a safe way that's not going to break everyone else's things. And the other thing that I think is that the more general a statement you make, the less confident that you should be about it. So I think that second statement especially translates pretty well to CSS, to specificity and scope. So like the wider the scope, the less specific your selector should be. And conversely, the smaller the scope, So the surer you are that you're only affecting one thing, the more confident that you can be about it. So it's okay to put important because you definitely know you're right there. And you're not bothering anyone else for that situation. So having important on those selectors is actually pretty important because you can just say you're right and then like go. Like that's it. Like you don't have to worry about breaking other people's things. You don't have to worry about yourself breaking again because it's final. It's just done. And if that thing's breaking again, you know the scope of what that selector was doing because you can look at it right there in the markup or in your template or whatever it is. And if you take that out, it's done. So here at HubSpot, we basically have like 3 main levels of how we organize our components in our CSS, where there's kind of a generalized style guide that we can pull, mostly variables, we call them tokens, for visual aspects of like colors, like font sizes, and a few other things. And then there's some like general styles about like buttons. And then we have CSS that's paired with we use React. So there's CSS that's paired with our React components. That some of them, actual components, use cssUtils, but the only times that they should be using them is when when you are implementing that component and you specify a certain thing on it, and that'll trigger it to like actually put the class on. So you're still at the implementation control, but like you kind of have like the option of like pushing something onto it. And then at the implementation level, you can just add the class to whatever component or whatever element that you're using, and you know you're not going to break anything else that's higher up on the chain or like adjacent to you. So it's really safe. So yeah, like I said, slide is just explaining that we can put it on there because we know the complete scope of our changes and we're not going to break other people's things. Here's an example of it actually being implemented. The PY for the flex row, justify center, and the timestamp function. This is one of the old files that's in CoffeeScript or in ES6 on just about every project. It's just the one that I work on is a beautiful little butterfly for that. So it's being used in conjunction with our custom classes. There's also the abstracted classes out that are from the component and style guide level that we don't see there. So we don't end up with this like object-oriented CSS like gobbledygook where you're just like attacking everything with like every possible class that it might need on there. It's pretty much just like, hey, I need a little adjustment here, a little adjustment there. And then you can kind of figure it out, move on. Like you don't have to sit there pixel pushing a ton or figuring out of like, oh, is this something that I should even be overriding? So the name of the project is cssUtils. When I make it open source, it will be cssUtils, because right now if you Google that, I only have to compete with like a 6-year-old Python CSS parser. So I think I can knock them out of the top page. So some like key pieces of this is that the classes should be considered immutable. Don't piggyback anything onto them. So when someone applies that like thing that has important, that they are expecting one thing, they only get that one thing. When I was building it, like I said, I started building it inside of a style guide. I took it out, and then right off the bat, it worked with 8 style guides. We went through rewriting our entire front end from Backbone to React, and at the same time, we switched over to a component library. It is one of the only things that has made it from well, before time to now. So the classes end up trying to abstract every part of like the weirdness of CSS, like that flexbox thing where you need to have it in a certain context. There's another one for like word wrap and text truncation. There's like a bunch of weird pieces to it, and you just take it out. You can just put text truncate on something, and it'll truncate your text. Like you don't have to Google around why like suddenly it's like breaking out of the bounding box, or that you had to like couldn't do it like word wrap or something. The classes by themselves don't have any visual opinion. So if you stick a selector on there on something that's blue, that thing's always going to be blue or whatever color that you want it to be. That's just where I decided to draw the line, because I wanted to focus on systems of layout and things that wouldn't change over a long time, so that you could specifically put it into whatever you wanted. And curate whatever selectors that are actually relevant to your build process, or like or the people that are using your product care about. So in addition to like being able to like use the new features, so I said a lot about problems, so things that we use. I could talk about adoption. Right now, well, in the process of getting people to start using this thing, because if anyone's ever tried to like get someone to use like this cool open source library that you found, and you're like, man, this would totally solve your problems, they definitely looked at you and went, thank you for homework. Like, definitely don't want to do that. So the way in which I ended up getting people to maybe consider using it, like, that was never mandated to be like forced, like you have to use this or anything, is I just kept reading pull requests. I kept looking at what people were doing, and if there was something that this would help in context of, I either pasted the instructions in, or well, I wrote them at one point to add to their project, or I made a pull request. But I never fixed their actual problem. I just told them how to fix it with this tool, and then made it easy as possible for them to just put that tool in and then start using it. So, I just try to say like, hey, I'm in context, I'm trying to help. And I was really lucky. I was lucky that people were open to talking about it. That I had already built relationships with these people by like talking to them both in person and on their pull requests. And I had plenty of practice knowing when to like push more or back off. But yeah, so I think I was pretty successful in adoption, because we actually have this deployed in production in over 276 apps that we built. I started trying to figure out like individual stats on cssUtils that are actually being used, and I got through a couple and found it kind of hard to tell, because you can concatenate classes together, so it's back to that like old selector problem a little bit, because I was trying to do it on a level of 276 apps, and I wasn't trying to get context of any feature. But I found over 6,000 of them, and I was like, it doesn't really matter. So, and the 276 in there plus is because all of the old style guides ended up pulling it in out of convenience. So there could be some other apps that are deployed that are using it that didn't show up in OpenGrok. So I think that was pretty cool that we got it very, very widely adopted by HubSpot. This is also something that's pretty cool. Most of the times, like, people said thanks or that they thought the project was cool was from over a year ago, when it was like really like, hey, this is idea, and I'm like pushing it on. But this guy won an award because a lot of people ended up, we have a bunch of ways we can express like thank you. He ended up winning the award for the most people saying thank you to him, but he also got the award for giving out the least thank yous. So that was kind of a really big deal for me to be like, oh, nice. He feels inconvenienced if he doesn't use it, but that's awesome. Thank you, guys. You guys got any questions? I'm cool to answer them.
Did you write your own docs, internal docs for this library, or is it?
Yeah. Yeah, I did write my own internal docs. They are part of the repo. There's a bunch of explanations of a lot of things I was thinking about going through. I'm planning on open sourcing this pretty soon. I also ended up, one thing that right now it isn't is it's not responsive. But just recently, I got a pretty good excuse to make it responsive because internally there's a need for it. So I'm planning on pushing basically like what we have without any of our custom infrastructure stuff in it. Push down to repo. Hopefully that doesn't last too long because it'll be replaced with version 2, where there's like some things that are already like being rendered by JavaScript because you can't make mixins inside of mixins in SAS. So there's a bunch of things that I was just like, all right, I'm starting to write a renderer. But basically, I'm going to keep going down that road and set it up so you can have JS modules of things that should be important and shouldn't be important in their browser ranges. And from there, they'll get rendered out to SAS, CSS, HTML as modules. Yeah, so also be with it. Yeah. I prepared questions because there were holes in the presentation. I guess that's it. I'll be around if you want to ask questions individually or anything like that. We still have plenty of time here. There's lots of pizza. Where eat it, take it home. I don't know. Hang out with it. You're more than welcome to it here as well. But yeah, welcome to hang out. Enjoy. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. Does anyone have announcements? Looking for a job, hiring, event announcements? Nobody? All right. So we'll hang around for a little while longer. That's it for now. Nice swing.
Anyone okay?
Oh, he didn't want to.
No.
Question.
Yeah, sure.
Dan, by the way.
Francisco.
Good to meet you. Did you get pushback from people mixing naming conventions and certain ways of doing things? So like you've got like media object, standard like picture, text over here.
Yeah, I got you.
And like there's media item, media content. Mm-hmm. Or you could just do that with these utility classes. Were there people saying, hey, why are you giving me 2 ways to do this? With like different naming conventions with them.
So yeah, so actually I included media in this. So I was lying when I was up on the stage saying that like it was only like 1 role classes, where even as I was building it, I was like, oh, this is something that falls into like layout. So it was like pretty convenient. I've also made some other like utilities that basically do the same thing as media in Flexbox. That like just works with our stuff that are like stuff. Never really had too much pushback in terms of like using it. Like there was a lot of like there was more an appreciation of like, hey, cool, like I'm using media object on the left or like image or whatever. And it was kind of still like the Wild West where like people were like still implementing a lot of their own stuff, and they started like, seeing that these patterns existed more through the library than having been like, oh, I have this like thing and I want to use it. And also at HubSpot, we have a lot of autonomy on our own teams.
So there was no incentive. Everyone could have just, and also when you go into any one of our apps, we have all our own deployables. So even though I'm building this like thing over here, there's no penalty, like there's no bonus to like use that versus something that's in your own repo. So if they didn't